This is the story of a few survivors who get stuck right in the middle of a desert. Even if they want to, they can't escape, nor can any help reach them. The story begins in the deserts of Mongolia, the largest desert in East Asia. A company had come here intending to extract oil, but their information turns out to be wrong. There is no oil here. Now, everyone is heading back. A plane has been sent to bring them all back. The pilot of this plane is named Frank, and he has a co-pilot with him. His name is AJ. Their job is to transport all the equipment and employees back to Beijing. Everyone boards the plane, and they take off towards Beijing. However, a massive sandstorm begins in the vast desert. AJ asks Frank, "What should we do now?" Frank replies that if they turn back, they will have to wait for fuel, and they won't have enough for another takeoff. "We have no idea how long that would take, so the only option is to keep moving forward." Frank takes the plane to a higher altitude to avoid the sandstorm. However, the plane is overloaded, and they get caught in the storm. They try to contact help via radio, but they are unsuccessful. Due to the sandstorm, one of the plane's engines fails. Frank says, "I'll have to make an emergency landing," and starts bringing the plane down. The landing is extremely difficult because visibility is zero. As the plane descends, its tail hits a rock, causing the rear door to open. Along with the cargo, one passenger is sucked out and killed. The plane slides across the desert for a long distance before coming to a stop. Upon checking, they realize that during the crash landing, they have already lost 2 more companions. They are still unable to leave the plane because the storm outside is severe. Once the storm passes, they discover that the entire plane is buried under the sand. After a while, the sand clears from the top of the plane, making it visible again. The survivors step outside and check their food supply, realizing they have enough food and water for about a month. AJ says he will walk his way out of the desert. They have already traveled about 200 kilometers deep into the desert. They are no longer in Mongolia, they are somewhere in China. None of them know their exact location, and the radio is still not working. AJ says, "I've run marathons and done hiking before, I can make it out." But he is told that it's the month of July, the hottest month in the desert. If you drink a glass of water, you'll sweat out 10 glasses within minutes. AJ says he will only walk at night. However, he is warned that traveling at night would be impossible because the mountains here are magnetic, compasses won't work. He would just keep walking in circles and end up in the same place. The man realizes that escaping alone is impossible. That night, while everyone is sleeping inside the plane, a severe sandstorm is raging outside. One of the men, named Davis, steps outside to relieve himself. On his way back, his foot hits a rock, and in the darkness, he slips and slides far away on the sand. He loses sight of the way back and gets lost in the darkness. He shouts for help, but due to the storm, no one can hear his voice. The next morning, when everyone wakes up, they realize that Davis is missing. They search for him, but there's no sign of him. Davis has been buried under the sand. This discovery leaves everyone worried. Among them, a woman, named Kelly, approaches the pilot, Frank, and asks him how much chances are of someone coming to rescue them. Frank replies, 5%. Frank tells Kelly that their chances of survival are extremely low because they are stuck right in the middle of the desert. They have very little food and water. If they try to walk out of here, the supplies will run out within 2 days, and no one will survive. Although there is very little chance of a rescue, Frank says he prefers to stay and wait, holding on to hope. Slowly, everyone's hopes begin to fade, and they start losing faith that anyone will come to save them. As a result, 2 of the men decide they will leave and try to walk out of the desert on their own. They want to take some water with them, but Frank refuses to let them. A fight breaks out over the water, and during the struggle, the water supply falls to the ground and spills. Among the group is a man named Elliot. He says, "I have an idea that could save all of our lives." Elliot explains that he has been observing the wreckage of the plane for a while, and he believes they could build a smaller plane using the parts from the wreckage. Frank asks, "What do you know about planes?" Elliot replies, "I used to design planes." The truth is, no one knows much about Elliot. He didn't work for the company that came to Mongolia for oil. One day, he just showed up, and for the past 2 years, he's been living with the team. Everyone is surprised by Elliot's plan, but for the first time in days, a small glimmer of hope is born in their hearts. They all agree to work together to rebuild the plane. However, Frank doesn't agree. He insists that it's impossible and outright refuses to help. The next morning, they discover that another man, named James, is also missing. Kelly wants to go out to search for him, but Frank stops her, saying, "I'll go find James myself." Frank sets out to look for James. While walking, he reaches the spot where their plane's tail had hit a rock. This is also the spot where a man had fallen from the plane during the emergency landing. That man's body is still there, but oddly, his clothes are missing. Near his body, Frank also finds spent bullet casings. Seeing all this leaves Frank deeply disturbed. At that moment, James appears. He tells Frank, "There were people here before we arrived." James says, "I came here to retrieve my watch, the one I lost in a poker game, but now the watch isn't on his wrist anymore." Both of them realize that desert looters must have been here. They took the watch and used the dead man's body for target practice. Frank tells James they should head back, but James refuses. He asks Frank, "Why aren't you letting them build the new plane?" Frank replies, "Because I can't give them false hope." James says, "Every human being in this world needs love. If we can't give them love, we should at least give them hope. And if we can't even give them hope, we should at least let them do what they want to do." Despite Frank's belief that building a new plane is impossible, James' words touch him. Frank agrees to help the others with the plane. Both of them return to the rest of the group. Together, they all start building the new plane. They avoid working during the day because of the extreme heat and only work at night. Their worries increase when sparks from welding accidentally fall onto a fuel drum they were saving for the generator. A massive explosion follows. Although no one dies, they lose their valuable fuel. Now, they have just enough fuel left to power the new plane to get them out of the desert. They decide not to use any more fuel and agree to work during the day despite the unbearable heat. They refuse to give up. They now need to attach one of the plane's wings to the frame. They have only one chance to attach it properly. If the wing falls, lifting it again would be impossible because they don't have a crane or any equipment strong enough to lift such a heavy wing. Carefully, they begin sliding the wing into place. Suddenly, the chain holding the wing snaps, and the wing slams into the plane. Everyone panics, but to their surprise, the wing hits exactly the spot where it needed to be attached. It's a stroke of pure luck. One of their teammates, who was inside the plane to bolt the wing into place, steps out and says, "I've secured the wing." With the wing attached, the structure of the plane is finally complete. Everyone's hopes soar. They truly believe they'll escape this desert now. They celebrate, dancing, and cheering. Meanwhile, they also clear sand to create a makeshift runway for the plane. One day, a violent storm rolls in, bringing heavy lightning. Lightning strikes dangerously close to the plane. The plane's wings are filled with fuel, so everyone runs far away to avoid an explosion. But Elliot refuses to leave. He stands on top of the plane, determined not to lose it at any cost. Just as lightning is about to strike Elliot, Frank leaps onto him, knocking him off the plane and saving his life. Elliot survives, and everyone knows if anything happened to Elliot, no one else would have the knowledge to complete the plane. They name the plane Phoenix. In Egyptian mythology, the phoenix is a powerful desert bird. There was still a lot of work left to do on the plane. Slowly, their water supply was running out. One night, they saw a group of people who had set up tents on the other side of the sand dunes. These people had plenty of food and water supplies. In fact, they were smugglers who used these desert routes to smuggle weapons from one country to another. Frank said, "We should ask them for water." Elliot objected, but the group went with Frank to the smugglers to ask for water. Frank and one of his men hid behind a rock in case the smugglers attacked. They would be able to fire back. Frank also had a gun. When they asked the smugglers for water, one of the smugglers suddenly shot at one of their men. Frank and his companion fired back, killing the smugglers. However, one of the smugglers managed to escape. Frank had a chance to shoot him from behind, but he chose not to pull the trigger. James noticed that one of the smugglers was wearing his friend's watch, the friend who had died falling from the plane. This confirmed that these were the same smugglers who had been here before. They were also the ones who had used their friend's dead body for target practice. This proved the smugglers were extremely dangerous. One of the smugglers, badly injured, was brought back to their plane. Some members of the group suggested killing him since he had killed one of their companions, but Frank refused to allow it. While they were arguing, Elliot suddenly shot the smuggler dead. This led to a heated argument between Elliot and Frank. Elliot accused Frank, saying, "You were the pilot. Because of you, we got stuck here. Because of you, one of our friends died. And despite me telling you not to, you went out to get water." Frank became furious and punched Elliot. Elliot felt humiliated, and his ego was hurt. Angry, Elliot declared, "I'm not going to help build the plane anymore." Later, Kelly approached Elliot and said, "We can't build this plane without you. We need you." Elliot replied, "If all of you ask me, if you request me, then I'll help." One by one, they all requested his help, even Frank. Frank said, "You're the boss now. Please help us finish this." Elliot finally agreed, and they resumed working on the plane together. One day, they spotted, using binoculars, that the smuggler who had escaped was now returning with reinforcements. However, the smugglers didn't immediately advance because they knew Frank's group was armed. Frank and his team had brought back the smugglers' weapons after the earlier encounter. The smugglers also knew that Frank's group would soon run out of food and water. Their plan was to wait until Frank's group became weak, and then they would attack. The group now starts working even harder. Finally, their work is completed. That's when Frank finds a magazine filled with different plane models. These were the same models Elliot used as inspiration to design the plane. This is when everyone realizes that the planes Elliot used to build were actually small toy planes meant for kids to play with. He used to make model planes. While those planes could fly, Elliot had never built a full-sized plane before. This revelation makes everyone, especially Ian, furious. Ian points a gun at Elliot and says, "You've been fooling us this whole time. You've never built a real plane before. This plane will never fly." But Elliot is confident and replies, "This plane will fly. We used to make small remote-controlled planes. They are actually harder to balance than large planes." Frank calms Ian down. Just then, a storm begins. As the wind picks up, the plane they worked so hard to build starts to lift off the ground slightly on its own. Seeing this, they realize the plane can fly. Their shattered hopes slowly start to revive. However, it's a full-blown desert storm, and the plane ends up getting completely buried in the sand. When the storm finally passes, they are worried again. Deep down, they still have doubts about whether this plane can really fly and get them out of there. But Frank says, "We all worked so hard to build this plane. We will fly it and get out of here." They all work together to dig the plane out of the sand. They pull it over to the runway they had cleared earlier. They start the plane's engine. It starts, but then stalls. They try several times until finally, the engine roars to life. Hearing the sound of the engine, the smugglers begin advancing towards them. All the smugglers are on horseback and armed with guns. They charge at full speed. The group lies flat on the wings of the plane. Their plane is very small, so there's no room for anyone to sit inside. They've essentially built a smaller plane out of the parts of the larger one. The plane starts speeding down the runway, while the smugglers fire at them from behind. Fortunately, none of the bullets hit them. However, the runway ends, and the plane drops into a deep ravine. The smugglers assume they are all dead, but in the very next moment, the plane rises up from the ravine and soars into the sky. Everyone is overjoyed. The weeks of backbreaking effort have finally paid off. And just like that, they escape death in the impossible desert, a place no one believed they could ever leave. At the end of the film, we are shown photos of all the characters. All of them are happy, back with their families, and pursuing their careers. Frank and AJ start their own airline, which they name Phoenix Aviation. Elliot's photo appears on the front page of a magazine, with a caption that reads, "NASA's New Hope?" with a question mark, meaning Elliot is now working at NASA. With this, the film comes to an end.